Conectadas podcast.
Let me ask about your trip to Chiang Mai first. I think that's a good starting point. Your thoughts about Thailand and I guess in contrast to the Philippines.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. What I mentioned to you earlier, I think it's great that you're doing what you're doing. We'll get into maybe the whys of what you do later. Actually, for selfish reasons, I wanted to do this podcast because I, in turn, also wanted to ask you questions, as to, how you're living your life. So maybe we can get into that. I was able to spend the long weekend with family in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and it was amazing. It wasn't my first trip to Thailand, but it was my first trip to Chiang Mai. And I was just very impressed and amazed by how just well run everything was from a tourism standpoint. And it provided just the right type of trip experience that myself needed after a very mentally and emotionally stimulating week, which we can get into later. But also for my family, Chiang Mai is such a great place to unplug. It's an amazing place for children. We went to sticky waterfalls. We bathed elephants, walked around, we ate amazing street food. And the whole time, my kids didn't ask for gadgets at all. So that's when you know a trip is good, when they're so amazed by what's in front of them that they don't turn to their devices. So I'm very grateful for that.
That's a huge thing. I'm glad you mentioned your kids enjoying so much that they didn't want screen time, especially in an age now wherein it's so embedded in our culture. I think our generations, we didn't really go through that. But the thing is, the irony of that is that we are in industries that we need these platforms, social media, technology. But I guess we also appreciate the slowness of nature. As you mentioned, being in Chiang Mai, wanting to disconnect, which brings me to ask you about your journey making your movie. You mentioned last week was crazy. You're probably doing press. A lot of people are asking about your film. I was thinking about this a lot because I don't want to ask questions that are similar to what were asked to you already, because I'm sure you're going to sound like a broken record and it's like copy paste. But that's why I want to ask you something else.
Okay, sure.
What makes making the movie, and now that you're promoting the film, what is happening on the inside for you in terms of like the emotional and subconscious landscape?
That's a great question. And that's certainly not a question that's been asked before. Usually people just want to know about, how we made the film or stories about production, how we shot it, which of course I'm very grateful for. Outside, I can honestly say is to date probably my most personal film, in the sense that it was a story that I wrote many years ago. I'd say more than 10 years ago. I was still living in Australia at the time. So I actually wrote the script to be an Australian story. So having written it there and then moving back to the Philippines, grappling whether I should still try to do the story, but not being able to figure it out. And the pandemic happened. And then suddenly being able to channel a lot of my anxieties and fears and all these new thoughts into a new script. Working with another scriptwriter partner, Anton Santamaria, we were able to really just channel a lot more of our feelings into this new story. So it was, in many ways, it was a blessing in disguise. So yes, it was a very personal story for me to do. I liken the experience over the past maybe 2 weeks to, it's almost like you're giving birth and getting married, having your debut, your 18-year-old debut, and graduating from high school all in one emotionally butterfly charged effect in your stomach. That's how I would really describe it. As a filmmaker, as a director, there comes a time when you say stop. You stop tinkering, you stop editing, and you let it go to the world, setting it out to sea. So it's very bittersweet. A part of me always wishes that I could just edit the movie forever and just keep on working and working and working. But the beauty of film is that it's meant to be seen, it's meant to be shared. And with that comes a lot of like nervousness. You're like, oh, how are people going to respond to this? Like, how are people going to react to this personal film that myself and a bunch of other great, wonderful people spent a big chunk of their year on? There's definitely a great sense of possessiveness, of ownership. And now that it's out in the world, I can say that it's been really interesting seeing the feedback of how people have perceived the film. It's being talked about in so many ways, for better or for worse. Now that I've had the time to unpack it with my team, we're amazed that people are talking about it, period. A lot of films come and go on Netflix. And yet, for some interesting reason, people are still talking about our film. And I think it's wonderful. I love reading all the comments. I love reading all the debates online as to why people like it, why people don't like it. So for me, it's a win. The fact that it's been able to create conversation on very important topics that I'm sure you and I are going to get into, which is, mental health, generational trauma. A lot of people were expecting maybe a zombie action film, but what I love is that random strangers have been messaging me. Oh, this reminded me a lot of my family. Thank you for making me see a lot of what I should have done, or just things like that. Just really wonderful messages from people who said they needed the film. It helped them unpack a lot of things from their lives. And because of messages like that, I'm in a very good place, thanks to audiences like that.
That's such an amazing thing to experience, releasing all that creativity, but then having that connection with people because they resonate with your work,
Yeah.
with your art. And
Yeah.
you mentioned unpacking generational trauma. I have conversations with some of my siblings who are a lot younger than me, more than a decade. When you're young, you're either shielded or you're oblivious to, I guess, harsher realities of life in terms of
Right.
like how family dynamics work. I understand parents, they want to protect their kids. But I guess as you
Mm.
get older, you start to see these dynamics. And I'm curious, what inspired or what influenced you tackling these issues in your film?
I've always been first and foremost just obviously I'm a horror guy. I love genre. I always tell people this. My favorite quote unquote movie monsters have always been zombies, and for several reasons. Number one is I feel like they're the monsters that are the most realistic. Like in like they seem like the most plausible type of monster that could actually come true. I think about zombies, and when I think about especially how zombies have been rendered in the early 2000s, like what Danny Boyle did with 28 Days Later, he put a new spin on zombies and making them man-made, in which case they were like infected by a man-made virus. And that stuck to me a lot because it made me realize that, hey, it could happen. Another great example is Train to Busan. Same thing. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was also like a military experiment that goes wrong. So, I love, the mythology of how zombies are created. But more importantly, what I love about zombie movies for me, and I've come to realize over the past couple of weeks, is there are different types of zombie fans, right? There are zombie fans who like the action oriented type of zombie film where they're being chased, they're being bitten, they're being transformed. It's more of like that relentless action World War Z. And that's fine. I love zombie films like that too. But I consider myself more the type of zombie fan that actually enjoys the stories of the humans in the zombie world. Those types of stories more interesting for me in the sense that, yeah, the zombies are cool, but oh my God, like let's delve into how these humans are kind of trying to make sense with their own lives. I love the rug pull of apocalypse films. It doesn't even have to be zombies. Like I just love watching dystopian films wherein the normal life that we know no longer exists and how are normal people trying to survive. I'm all about that and I'm all for that. So for me, zombie apocalypse dystopian films are such a great way to bring out character studies and to bring out the human condition. So that's what I set out to do with Outside. And then when I started rewriting it with Anton in a Philippine setting, we talked about setting it in a farm and setting it in a not just a farm but a hacienda. And we talked about something that happens quite a lot, in Philippine families, wherein there's that sense of, diba? I mean, we're very family, right? Like, rules, cultures, and expectations are passed on from generation to generation. Behaviors are passed on from generation to generation. So I wanted to look into why that is, and shine a light as to why are men in particular very hesitant to unpack or to share what went on in their lives in the past. Why do they bottle it up? And finally, when they're confronted with it, why can't they deal with it? So writing Outside with that angle, I wrote it with the intention that hopefully maybe people can watch it and they can realize that, okay, it's not just me who went through this shit. I see what this movie is trying to do. I see where the character ended up, and hopefully that won't be me. I will do my best to kind of not be that guy. That was my hope. That was the message that I was really trying. And not just for father character, but for the mom character as well, which I can talk about a little later on.
That's a really interesting take on trying to remind men and women that we don't need to just follow the status quo, right? And
Yes.
we're in a time now where they're all being challenged, especially parenting, and the way we relate to each other in romantic relationships and friendships. I want to ask you also about being in the video production industry in terms of like the commercial side, wherein it's a very stark contrast to filmmaking where there are producers, but as compared to like client work where you're really servicing advertising agencies, multinationals, clients, you have to sort of like switch wavelengths when you're in those types of shoots, working with different kinds of people. And I'm curious how you navigate that world, those worlds actually. How do you process and manage the stress also? Because it is a very stressful industry.
Both industries are definitely very different, but at the same time, they have a lot of similarities too, in the sense that, at the end of the day, you need to huddle up and shoot something. You need to still collaborate with a bunch of people and still create. What is being created is where it begins to become completely different, of course. In the advertising world, like you said, there's a lot of differences in the sense that the story that you're trying to create is a story about a particular product that a client is trying to sell. So obviously a lot of like purpose and a lot of like intentions and or as a favorite advertising word is, what is the objective of this shoot? Yeah, what is the objective? So you're shooting a lot of objectives basically, and because more often than not, advertising is usually much shorter. It's shorter form. You're doing something that's 30 seconds, 90 seconds at the longest. So every frame is often very scrutinized, or is something that needs to be analyzed or explained in great detail. With film, I mean, yes, you talk about shots, you talk about frames, but the thing that you're trying to create is more of like a broader story or a longer film. Having said that, I love both. I'm very grateful that I'm able to play in two sandboxes. I love the challenge of being able to go into a advertising meeting, switch on a certain part of my brain, pack that up, and then maybe the next day go into a script that I'm writing, which is usually more often than not much darker and much more horror. So I'm very grateful for both because it's a yin yang kind of thing. I think I would go crazy if I had to just do one of them. So I'm still quite happy that I still get to play because it allows me to unplug from one thing. When something gets too overwhelming, I can always say, okay, I'll turn back and work on some ads. Or if the ad industry feels a bit too heavy or stressful for me at some point, I can always just take some time off and work on scripts. So at the end of the day, the gratitude I have of being able to still just do what I love, man. I'm at the end of the day, I have no complaints. I'm shooting stuff. I'm being able to work with amazing people. So
That's a really special place to be coming from, a place of gratitude. When I was researching before doing this podcast with you, I remembered I saw your short film, The Barbershop, years ago.
oh yeah,
Like, there was a very unique vibe to it that made you feel very light, very heartwarming. It's very different. You mentioned a while ago, there's like a yin and yang thing, being able to release that kind of creativity. How do you channel your creative energy and how you release stress and anxiety? Like, what are your ways, like, aside from just creative work, like maybe there are other things that you do, just make you feel more grounded, more positive?
I've never been the type of person who can just chain myself to my desk and work. In fact, a lot of the best ideas I have are usually when I'm moving, which is why I try to get out and move. I don't know if it was a compliment, but one of the funniest comments I received, I bumped into a friend of mine, and then he says, "Oh, Carlo, there's a new horror film on Netflix. You did that?" I was like, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "Huh, you don't look like a horror director." I was like, what's that supposed to mean? I guess in his mind, like if you direct scary things, you need to be all in black. Although I am in black now, but I think the perception of that is if you create scary stories, you're meant to be dark, scary person. When in fact, if you read up on the biographies of some of the great horror directors, apparently they're all quote unquote, normal, just fun-loving people. And I see myself in the sense that stories that are dark, but that stems from my imagination. And for my imagination to flow, I find that I like just being outdoors a lot. I'm not the type that, I need to write something scary. I need to blast really dark, scary music. In fact, it's the opposite. I do a lot of my writing during the day. I value sleep a lot. I love just moving. I love playing sport. My wife and I are very much into pickleball these days, and we have a great group of friends who share the same passion for it. And it's so fun. It keeps us fit. I also love going on bike rides with my kids. I take them on little mini hikes. Just getting all that oxygen, man, just opens up my brain. And I find that's what works for me in terms of like unleashing my creativity. So that and coffee, which I'm having now.
It's really like natural endorphins, being out there. It just fuels you, right?
See, it's so weird. The pandemic was one of the most horrible things to happen to all of us. But it also taught me a lot of things about myself. It taught me how to value sleep. It taught me the value of waking up early and being appreciative of the day. I used to be such a night owl slash insomniac in like my 20s. I'm an early riser now. I get a kick out of waking up just before the sun peaks through the horizon. Maybe it's me trying to be cinematic with my life. I love it when I'm awake and I just stare at like the sky and then just seeing the sun kind of like peek open. There's just something really energizing about that and being able to and then yeah, I actually get a lot of writing done in that time frame between like 5 a.m. to like 7 a.m., the 2 hours. Sometimes I'll just write really good stuff because it's the whole world's still asleep. My kids are still asleep. I'm able to kind of just have me time. And there's just something quite sacred about that time. The world's still quiet. And because of that, my brain isn't running in a million places. I'm able to focus. So yeah, that's another hack, man. Just being able to get good sleep and then just waking up early. Are you that way as well? Are you a early morning person?
Definitely a night
Yeah.
owl before, but I end up wanting to wake up earlier now because I want time to just be with myself. And it's just honestly nice to like wake up and the city's still asleep. You don't hear
Yes.
anybody else. You're able to get your thing, to just write and flow, do some
Yes.
movement. Like it feels
Yes.
really good. But I think it's really important. And I think I understand now, like my older friends would tell me like years ago that, yeah, no, you're gonna end up waking up really early as you get older. And I'm like, oh, I get it. They sleep early, they wake up early. It's sacred. It's a gift. I feel like nowadays when you sleep so late and you have to wake up really early, it destroys you. As you get older, you can really see the physical cues of like, okay, this feels good. Sleep more, like sleep early.
You mentioned movement, and that's something I'm still trying to hack, I think, is because I do a lot of sports. I tend to wake up really like very stiff and sore. Like it takes a while for me to kind of like warm up and loosen my joints. It kind of sucks because like the older I get, the every time I wake up. So you mentioned movement. Do you do yoga? Do you do more active like cardio to wake yourself up?
I used to do yoga just a few years ago. I think as you get older, your body really starts to change and it does get sore way faster. I was just researching on different movements and I started doing a lot of Qigong. And
Okay.
yeah, and for some reason, it helps a lot. Like it's not too high impact for me, like especially with I had a lot of like back aches now, for some reason. And but like
Same.
Qigong, there's something about it that really opens it up a lot in this time of my life. I feel I need more stretching. Like I don't lift as heavy as I used to anymore. But I
Yeah,
think
same.
like a lot of stretching does benefit me a lot. And I mean I do understand the importance of like resistance training and still lifting weights. But I think that if you're tight though and you're like aching, it's hard to kind of keep, like compounding the weight. So I feel like
Yes.
nowadays qigong, a lot of like gentle active stretching helps me a lot. Just release a lot of that pressure in the back.
And strength for me naman, strength training is still so important. But like you, I don't feel the need to like, it's not about gains anymore as like when you're
Yeah,
younger.
yeah.
I'm really after functional strength. I actually notice like the more I work out or the more I lift weights in the gym, the better I perform like in terms of sports. But not just sports, like it also gives me energy to just move throughout the day. Which is why I also like doing workouts early morning. But like you, weights with that are heavy enough just to give me proper mobility. Actually, that's one thing I focus more on now. It's mobility. Stiff lower back, sore knees. So a lot of what I do is just to try and loosen that up. So I might look into that, what you're doing in the morning. Yeah, I do a lot of like just mini jumping jacks and slapping my body with like, or I do band work, but nothing hardcore. But just the simple act of just doing that. Sometimes you just need 10 minutes, right? To just activate your body. And
Just
then
a few minutes, you're good. You don't need an hour like right away. I feel like it's a younger person's game, I think. Like, I mean, some people resonate with that, but honestly, any movement, 5-10 minutes, it helps, and it
that's
just
it
changes the way you operate.
for
So I
sure.
feel like have you ever tried like acupuncture or like an osteopath? I feel like those really helped me with like my back problems.
I have undergone acupuncture and it has helped. Can't say I seek it out number one because I'm scared of needles. So every time every time I see them, start to put them like in my back, I always tense up, which is what you're not supposed to do. But what I do realize is after acupuncture session, yeah, I feel great. That definitely helps for me. Another thing that I've been doing, my wife and I've been doing actually lately is we've been doing cold plunge. We invested in a cold plunge machine, and it's been incredible. It's basically a souped up version of what they say now. Take a cold shower in the morning, and you'll feel great. So basically, that's kind of like what a cold plunge does. And I find that whenever I cold plunge in the morning, I don't feel the need to have coffee like right away. So that's another hack that for me, it has been quite a game changer actually in terms of recovery, in terms of just being able to just be energized. What I like about cold plunging is that it wakes up my brain. My routine is I'll usually wake up in the morning, much like you, I'll do my own quiet personal thing. And then as soon as my wife wakes up, we kind of both just take turns jumping into the ice bath. And then, yeah, we feel great. And by the time we're done with all of that, our kids are awake. And then suddenly we're in energetic parent mode as opposed to cranky parent mode. So, yeah, very, very thankful to have kind of unlocked that.
That's a huge hack, cold plunges. I'm totally into that as well.
Nice. Yeah.
Chiang Mai has a lot of like cool spots wherein you can even alternate with herbal saunas where you can jump into,
Wow.
then go into the cold plunge, then alternate, then you do it as many
Wow.
times,
Yeah.
and you're
I've
just
heard of
like
that.
high as a
That's
kite naturally.
that's
Like it's
really.
just the
So wait,
best.
the guy who set us up with the cold plunge, his name is Sean. He's the owner, one of the co-owners of the brand that we use, which is the Optima. He does that. He does hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. So I obviously don't have a sauna in my house, so I haven't been able to do that. But apparently it's amazing. And if you're saying
It's
there's an
amazing.
herbal sauna, so you're inhaling all
Yeah.
these.
Yeah, it was my first time to try it out. It's interesting because like it was sort of like I don't know if you've heard of a temazcal. In Mexico, they have like these igloo domes made out of mud, and they put a lot of like different kinds of herbs inside and really hot stones. And then you go
Wow.
inside it. It has the effect of a sauna, but a bit more intense. But that's sort of what they did in this space in Chiang Mai. So you enter
Nice.
and then they're just adding water and stones inside. Then you jump out, go into the cold plunge. Then when you're good, go back in, and it just creates this very unique high. The ice bath, you feel really alive, but then there's a soothing effect with the heat. It's a great combination. Highly recommend it.
I'll try that. Oh, it's a shame I didn't get to discover that while I was in Chiang Mai, but that sounds amazing.
But you were so lucky though that you arrived in Chiang Mai a few weeks after the flood.
I had heard that there were some crazy floods, and yeah, I was able to talk to some of the locals about it, and yeah, they said it took a lot of work to clean up. But again, man, like just to show you how efficient their government is. Like I got there were no signs that anything ever hit them, and they only mentioned it like when we asked, "Hey, did you guys have a flood?" They said yes, but they said that the government moved quickly to just clean everything up. Chiang Mai is so clean. I when I describe it to friends, I'm like, it's like Poblacion, Malate, but 100 times cleaner. Like there's no trash. Like it's so well run. It's so inspiring, man. Like I just get very envious when I see countries that are very similar to us in terms of culture and topography and just seeing how things work over on their side. Well, to me, it seemed like they're running the show a lot more efficiently over there.
It's really inspiring. One word comes to mind when I see them go through crisis. It's resiliency. They don't wallow. It's like, all right, we went through this. Let's make things better. It's a lot of, I guess, service, and maybe it's steeped into the Buddhist culture of like serving others and not complaining. You don't hear them complain a lot. It's more, how can I help you? Like, let me help you, and
Right.
not wanting anything in return. I think that's something huge. Yeah, but you're right, man. Like going to countries that are similar to the Philippines, it makes you feel really inspired about we can make things better, and we have the capacity.
Absolutely do. And you talk about resiliency, and I honestly think that's something Filipinos have in spades as well. I mean, if you think about it, we also have our very fair share of natural tragedies and typhoons and things of that sort. And every time that happens, you instantly see, what makes the Filipino shine, which is, the bayanihan spirit. And there's a lot of resiliency in that as well. It's not of a lack of resiliency that we have, but it's really more of just like accountability from the leaders that we have. It's like if we had just a better government that could take care of problems like that, like in the same way how Chiang Mai was quickly just sorted out and then seemed to bounce back. And then I think we I mean, I'm sure everyone would agree we'd be much better off. So that's actually what kind of is quite frustrating, right? We used to be, I think, a lot more progressive than Thailand or Vietnam even, and then you just hear stories about how they just seem to have just overtaken us, and I think it just really stems to do from, I guess, the leaders that all these countries have chosen and the leaders that we've chosen.
I guess with the Philippines, we want things to be better and better leaders. And we're in a very interesting time, I think, globally with the way things are, the leaders that we've picked. Ultimately, it's, we rely on them, but at the same time, it's the way we choose to see its perspective, which brings me to my
Yeah,
next question about choosing the kind of life you want to live and finding purpose and meaning. You're living out your passion, you're filmmaking, and, you have a family and you're able to connect with a lot of people and work with great, talented individuals. But how do you cultivate that? Especially when there's a lot of the media, the world is it's pretty negative. You've mentioned you try to live an active life, but I guess in terms of your self-talk, cultivating a meaningful, beautiful life, how do you do it?
that's a great question, and it's something that honestly I don't have concrete answer for, but I'll tell you why. Only because the life we lead is really just constant process of experimenting, of learning, of finding things. The one thing that I value the most, obviously, is how my life is with not even for myself, but for my family. I'm grateful that I have like the most amazing, support system in my wife. I think without her, I would just not be living the life that I have now, because a lot of the, quote unquote success that I've found, not just in my career, but just with the little milestones that I've achieved, is really in huge part to what she's done as well. So as a partner, we're a team. We both have completely separate careers. We both are in different industries. But the one thing we're reunify on is that we try to be the best parents that we can. So that's my priority. When you talk about cultivation, the thing I'm really trying my best to cultivate is just being able to not be the character in my movie outside. It's to be the complete opposite of that and just be a great father to my two children. And my wife sets the example. She sets the bar, of which I'm constantly trying to jump over, but I can't because she's just better at parenting than I am. But see, what I'm saying is it's finding your tribe. The older I get, the smaller my circle gets. I always used to think that was like a joke or a cliche. I used to be a much more, I guess, social person. And it's not that I've become a hermit. It's just that I just take much more enjoyment in just a slower life, in just a smaller group of people. I don't feel the need to go out to party. Not that I ever was. I don't feel the need to be seen. I don't really like social events. I'm not a big fan of like going to clubs or bars. I'm more about just cultivating a smaller circle who I can have just, good conversations with. That's more valuable to me. I learn more from less, if that makes sense, by having longer, more meaningful conversations with less people. By talking to less people, that means you're able to invest more time. I don't think I'm the worst schmoozer in the world, but ask me out for a cup of coffee and I'll hold the fort with you there, or a beer. That's more my jam. That's how I like cultivating relationships, is that I like talking to people that way, as opposed to a crazy busy like networking session. That's really not my thing. So that's really the main thing I try to cultivate.
I totally resonate with that. There's something about more intimate connections. Too many people, I feel like, especially when you're working with a lot of people as well, you want the flip side of that, to be able to have more vulnerable encounters where you can be more at ease. You mentioned parenting, and I think that's something that I feel it really changes the way you look at your life. I'm curious, what are the lessons that you've learned? I'm sure they're nonstop, but right now, what are the most relevant lessons that you've learned from being a parent?
My God, there are so much. I wouldn't be able to put them in like, order of preference and whatnot. But I can 100% say that becoming a parent was probably the biggest game changer of my life, in the sense that it really shifted how I viewed the world, how I viewed myself. It made me realize that my own goals as an individual would need to take a backseat to the goals that I have for my kids. And I was okay with that. The amazing thing about becoming a parent is like when you realize that it's not all about you anymore, it feels good realizing that. I think that's the best realization, when you become selfless as a result. You want to be the best person that you can so that you can be great for your kids. And I think now it's a perfect segue to talk about, there's one part in my film where, going to the mother character, right? She talks about how she wanted to leave her family because she felt she was broken. She wanted to fix herself. There's a key line in that scene, in one of the dinner scenes, where she says, I just wanted to leave and fix myself so that I could become a better parent to you both. And for me, that is also a main thesis of what I wrote Outside, is I want parents to realize that, hey, it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not live in this quote unquote perfect family. It's okay to be separated as long as you all fix yourselves and you love your children. So that's the biggest thing I've learned. It's okay for me to make mistakes. And my wife will attest, I make a lot of mistakes as a parent. I fumble the bag many, many times. Sometimes, I feel like I'm a child still myself. But I'd like to think that I'm proud of the fact that I'm trying. And I think that's the main lesson there, is that, as a parent, you just have to keep on trying, because your kids deserve it. They deserve nothing less.
I think a lot of people need to hear that. We're going to mess up. It's part of it. We learn from the mistakes, and at the same time, they're learning from us making mistakes, because then they become better people, right?
And that's a great point that you mentioned. Being a parent makes you realize that you're actually being watched. You're being observed. I read a really cool quote the other day. It said, like, kids won't learn or absorb the stuff you say, but they will remember the things that you do, which I think is great, which basically says they follow the example that you lead. If you set the tone in your house, they will remember that, and they will carry that over onto how they become parents. So that's a big deal for me in terms of how I, choose to live my life at home, and trying to portray myself as a dad. For me, the best reward I could probably hope for in the future, when old and gray, is that, like, I'll be able to see my kids with their own kids, and them loving their kids the same way that, my wife and I do. Then for me, that would be just like the biggest win in the world. I think when you're in your teens and in your 20s, you should really be about, what is your purpose in this planet? What is the one thing that you love, and seek it out. I think that's something that everyone should absolutely strive to do, especially when they're young. And that's something I did. And I guess the thing I'm quite fortunate to, be discovering, is that I'm still able to. I mean, let's not tell people that, oh, I'm sorry, you're old, you're a parent, you can't do your own shit anymore. It's not that. It's like you can still follow your bliss, but in many ways, the stakes are greater, because you're not just doing it for yourself anymore. You're doing it for, there are people who were counting on you to do well. That's how I kind of motivate myself. Motivate, pressure, maybe the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's one of the best things. And I guess also, like, raising your kids and seeing how you're living a life where you're pursuing your bliss, pursuing your passion, and they see that, hey, I can do that too. I want to do that too. My
Yeah,
dad and mom are chasing their dreams. Let's chase my dreams too.
yeah,
And
and we're not my wife and I are not the type to tell our kids, like, oh, you got to do this, or take this lesson, or do this sport. Like, we give them enough leeway to just, number one, first and foremost, like, if they take up a sport, we say, all right, we're not going to pressure you to join a team or to whatnot, but if you want to try a sport, as long as you're having fun, that's all we want. I'm not about, like, oh, you got to win this trophy, or you got to beat that person. No, it's not that. I mean, yes, sports is great in teaching you about how to handle competition and adversity. That's what I love about sports. But right now, I just want my kids to find what they enjoy, and then from there, it's up to them now how they want to, what sport they want to pursue. And that same goes with, like, their passion and whatever as well. Like, I don't try to steer them into a particular field just because it's something I do. I mean, I love it when they hang out in my office, and they see me writing a script, or doing storyboards, and they do their own little comics and storyboards, and that makes me happy. But I never once ever say, oh, you got to do it this, like, no, like, for them, it's all play. And then that's what I try to just impart. If they want to follow the industry, or the job that I do, is great, but I'm never going to force them to.
what made you realize the importance of play? Like, was that cultivated from childhood, or even like as you grew up? Like, how has
Yeah,
that become important to you?
I think similar to you, like, right. I grew up in the same era, as in when we didn't have cell phones growing up. We had, at the most gadgety thing we had were like, the family computer, the Nintendo. But even then, yeah, I would play, family computer a lot, but not the same way a lot of kids now just stay glued onto their devices. So play for me is was such a core memory. Play was about, like, okay, it's 4 o'clock. siesta time done, and we would just go off and into the open and just stay out till it got dark, and we would come home with skinned knees and just mud on our faces. And the awesome thing about all of that is that my parents were cool with it, and that really stuck with me. Like now, you hear a lot of talk of like helicopter parenting, or like, oh no, that kid can't stay out, he's gonna inhale all this pollen, or oh no, oh no, there's a virus in the mud. And yeah, I guess times are different. Would I send out my kids alone to play in like some random park? No, I would not, because times are different. They're just stranger people now. But I would encourage them to play. Like if whenever my kid falls and hurts himself, I just say, can you walk, or like how does it look? Yeah, I let them process it. I try not to hover. I try not to show them that I'm too concerned, because in many ways that's the lessons I was taught when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was taught like, handle your shit, so to speak. Um, and that's something I've always taken with me, and it's something I hope that more parents can strive to do. Like, let's try to give our kids more unplugged experiences, because I think it did us good, right? Let's try to develop their brains in such a way that make them realize that there's a bigger world out there than the devices that they're holding in their hands. So that's a big deal for me and my wife. We always try to unplug our kids and make them play.
For sure. Same here. It's really important. Like I know it's unavoidable. I mean, there are people that are more radical with their approach, wherein zero screen time, but I feel like
No
it's
naman. No,
important.
I
It's
mean,
important, Ren.
yeah,
You
yeah,
need it, but they need to play. They need to play outside, run around, get dirty. There's still a lot
yeah.
of so much value in that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, we also enjoy when our kids use gadgets for play. Like a good example is like my son discovered this cool app wherein a flag of a country will show, and then he has to guess which country it is. And he's so obsessed with geography now because of that. And I'm like, that's awesome. It should really be a balance, right? It should really be our job as parents to find how do we harness all these great technological advances and use it for good. I think what you're doing is a great example of that. Is that you're harnessing the powers of video chat and podcasting and all that, and then using your network to hopefully spread good lessons about living the life, and you're doing it through technology, right? I wouldn't consider myself like a radical parent in the sense that my kids can't use gadgets at all, because they absolutely do. But the challenge there is really just finding the best way for them to use it, right? So that's always the struggle.
It is. It really is. I don't think people. I mean, whenever you go to like a cafe and you see like a family together and the kids are on their screens,
Yep.
it's part of parenting now. It's a reality.
Yep. And I'm trying to really be mindful of screen time, because yeah, I've been reading just all these things about how, signals from phones and gadgets that emit radiation, hinder brain growth. And I'm paying more attention to studies like that, only because it's something I really want to do as a parent, is just to make sure they live an optimal life. And if there's a learning there that, looking at gadgets for X amount of hours hampers their brain growth, then it's something I really need to pay attention to, right?
No, 100%, man. Like the studies are there, and it's just interesting to see how things will play out in the next few years with how people are going to be allowing their kids to use devices and stuff, and how things will
Yes,
advance with the way things are.
that's right.
But yeah,
And
man.
not
I
just
mean,
not just for kids, even for
for
adults.
everyone, for
Like
all of us, yeah, for sure.
like I'm sure you've heard of the term monkey mind, right?
Hmm.
In the sense that monkey mind meaning, because of all the devices and all the access to information that we all have, is sometimes we fall into this rabbit hole of doom scrolling, and just thinking it's okay that we want to immediately fill our brain with the latest things of what's happening in the news. And because of that, you get monkey mind, wherein it feels like there are all these monkeys in your brain just kind of bouncing around, and it just messes with your day. I'm guilty of that. Like, I'm one of the struggles that I have every morning is trying my best not to look at my phone up until it's absolutely necessary. And I fail quite a lot, to be honest. Sometimes, I just want to wake up and and know the news, or I just want to wake up to see if anyone's messaged me. And I notice when that happens to me, I instantly go on Instagram, go on my NBA app. I want to check basketball scores, or I want to just see who messaged me on WhatsApp. And next thing you know, oh shit, an hour has passed, and I missed out on a great sunrise. I missed out on having a great breakfast, and boom, monkey mind. So yeah, man, like that needs to stop.
It's real. It's real. And it
Real,
takes a
yeah, for
lot
sure.
of effort to counter that. We're living in these times, man, where we need to like
Yeah.
make an effort. If not, it'll eat you up.
I watched a video on YouTube
Yeah.
about that, saying that when you wake up, allow yourself time to just let your eyes adjust to adjust your circadian rhythm, right? Just try to face the morning sun, get some vitamin D, and don't bombard your mind with relentless information yet, because much like your body, your mind also needs time to kind of wake up and to activate. um, and it's been proven that as soon as you wake up and you start bombarding your mind, you start getting more stressed and anxious as a result.
No, 100%. I've read those studies too, and I think it's true. I mean, we see it when we engage with like our devices right away. It becomes just so overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, thanks for sharing that, man. And then thank you for taking the time. I know you've
Sure.
been busy. It's been great having this conversation, man. Like
Oh,
really
thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And like I said, guys, I guess maybe the takeaway we can have here is that, look, we live in a world where technology is inevitable. So I think the challenge for us as humans is, let's take more responsibility of it, right? And let's take responsibility to cultivate ourselves based on the technology that we have. Let's use the tech that we have at our hands for, to become better people. Like, how do we do that? So like I said, again, I think like what you're doing is great. You're using technology as we speak. We're not doing this podcast in the studio, we're doing it like in completely different countries. So I think that's awesome. And just maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't have been able to do this, and yet here we are. So it's all about finding that balance.
It is, man.
And
It is. Like, well said. Thank you,
yeah,
man. Thank you, Carlo. Really appreciate the time. And
no, thank you.
congrats on the
Thanks
film,
for
bro. Like,
thank you, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
you're welcome, man. Take care.
The Nick Diaz Podcast.